In this lecture, we will discuss how to use selection structures.
The first selection structure we'll take a look at is called the if-then statement. Let's start by looking at an example. Let's suppose we have a business or a store that has the following policy. We have customers that buy items from the store. So if the total value of the purchase is greater than $100, then the customer gets a 5% discount. So you spend $100 or more and you get a 5% discount. Now, if the total value of the purchase is less than or equal to 100, then there would be no discount. So what we would like to do is write an application that would give us the final cost of the purchase with the discount considered. So for example, if we make a purchase and the total is $67.89, there should be no discount. So the customer should pay $67.89. But if the customer buys a bunch of stuff that comes to $213, then the customer should get a 5% discount. So the customer will have to pay $202.35. Here's some code to get us started. It's not complete though. So the first line gives us a variable. We declare a variable called total, and it's going to be a double. And we see here that it's going to take the text of TB total. So let's say we have a text box that's called total. We enter in the value that the total purchase is. We convert it to a double. That's what's going on in this first line. The very bottom part of the code is going to take our total, which at this point should be either the initial total or the discounted total. We convert it to a string, and then we concatenate that with pay, a colon, then a dollar sign. We store that in str, and then this lb pay, let's say we have a label that would display what the person is supposed to pay. And that's going to store the concatenated string. So we know what's going to happen at the very beginning, and we know what's going to happen at the end, but this middle part is what is missing. So this section right here is incomplete. So we need to actually change the total. So if the total is more than 100, we need to make that 5% discount happen. So the way we can do that is just multiply the total by 0.95, which is pretty much saying get 95% of the total cost, which is the same thing as doing a 5% discount. And if this is not the case, if the purchase is not more than $100, then we need to change, or I should say we don't make any changes. So if it's greater than 100, then we would say the total is 0.95 times the total. Otherwise, we don't make any change. So the question is, what do we actually put in this section of our code? Here's a flowchart to help us illustrate what we're supposed to do in this section of the code. So we're going to start right here where we're going to have the user enter the total. So we'll have some text box, ask the user to enter a total in there, and maybe click on a button to calculate. And then we got to figure out what the total is going to be. So we will go down the arrow and we ask, is the total greater than 100? If yes, we'll go left in our flowchart here and say that the total should be equal to 0.95 times the total, and then we'll move down to where it says print total, and we would display that total. Now let's backtrack a little bit. If our total is not greater than 100, so if the answer to this question is no, well, we should just skip the yes part and just go down to the no section, and we just print the total as is. We can use what's called an if-then statement to help us with this. Now, if you're familiar with the if statements in Java or in other programming languages, you're going to find this is pretty much identical to it, just some differences in the syntax. So the if-then statement just allows us to execute statements based on some condition that is either true or false. So we have some condition. If it's true, we'll execute a set of statements. If it's false, then we don't execute that set of statements. So let's take a look at the format of the if-then statement in Visual Basic. We get something like this. So we have if, a condition, then the then. So if and then are keywords in Visual Basic. Notice they're capitalized, or at least the first letter is. And then we have this section of true statements, and then we end the if statement, or I should say the if-then statement, with end if. So in this format, the condition here is some logical expression. So think of this condition as just a placeholder. but it's going to contain a logical expression that is either true or false. The true statement section, that's also a placeholder, and that's going to either be a single statement or a set or a block of statements that would execute only if the condition is true. So if our condition is false, we would skip all of the true statement section and we would go past right after the end if portion of the if-then statement. Let's go back to our earlier example with computing the discount and see how we can use the if-then statement to help us. So our first line still has total as a variable of type double, and we're going to enter the value in a text box. We'll use the val method to convert it and store it in a total. And then we have this section right here that contains the if-then statement. So right here. So we say if total is greater than 100, so here's our condition. So total greater than 100, so this is our condition. Then total equals total times 0.95. And then we have our end if. So if the value of total is greater than 100, we're going to set total to be 95% of the total. If this is not true, which means total is less than or equal to 100, we just skip this line and we move on to the next line that converts the total to a string, concatenates it with the pay, and then the $ string, stores that into str. So this sure enough takes care of our problem where we can compute a discount if the total is greater than 100. In our last example, notice that we used the greater than symbol to compare the total variable and the value 100. So if the total was greater than 100, we did our conversion. The greater than symbol is an example of what we call a comparison operator. Comparison operators just simply compare two values, and they return either true or false. It just depends on the operator that we use and the result of the comparison. So from our earlier example, when we use the greater than comparison operator, so here we have x greater than y, this is going to check if the value of x is greater than the value of y. If so, this is going to be true, and if it's not the case, it's going to return false. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So let's say x is 120 and y is 100. Then that means x greater than y is going to be true because 120 is greater than 100. Now if we have something like x is 81 and y is 100, then x greater than y is going to be false because 81 is not greater than 100. There are 6 comparison operators that we commonly use in our programs. In fact, if you're familiar with programming in general and written programs in other languages, these are somewhat similar. There are some differences in terms of the syntax. So we'll first take a look at equal to. Now notice the symbol. It's one equal sign. This is not a typo. In Visual Basic, we just use one equal sign to compare equality, whereas in other languages you would use two equal signs. This is, I think, just a Visual Basic thing, but this is just how we compare equality in Visual Basic. Then we have greater than, which is the greater than sign. We've seen this already. We have greater than or equal to, which is the greater than sign and then the equal sign together. We then have the less than sign, or that comparison operator, which is just the less than symbol. We then have less than or equal to, which is the less than sign and then the equal sign. And then finally we have the not equal to. Now take a look at this one very carefully. Looks different, doesn't it? In other languages, you would usually have the exclamation point and then an equal sign to denote not equal to. But in Visual Basic, we actually use a less than symbol and a greater than symbol. And you might think this is really odd, but it's not odd when you think about what's going on here. Another way we can think of this is our comparison operator is saying that the two things are either less than or greater than each other. In other words, if it's less than or greater than, they cannot be equal to. So this is how Visual Basic handles the not equal to part. It's basically checking, are these two either less than or greater than each other? So they just put the two symbols together, and this is the same thing as saying, are they not equal to each other?